Get ready for an epic journey, because today we're taking a deep dive into the story of life on Earth.
That's right, and it's a story that goes way beyond our planet. We'll actually have to start with the vast universe itself to really grasp how life began.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a minute. What does the universe have to do with life here on Earth?
Well, pretty much everything. Think about it. The elements that make up our bodies, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, they were all created in the hearts of stars billions of years ago. We're literally made of stardust.
Wow, that's amazing. So, to understand life, we first need to understand the universe's origin story. Where do we even start?
We start with the Big Bang, the prevailing scientific theory for how the universe began. Imagine a single point, infinitely dense and hot, containing all the matter and energy in the universe. About 13.8 billion years ago, this point began to expand rapidly, and that expansion is still happening today.
That's mind-boggling, but how did we go from this explosion to stars and galaxies?
As the universe expanded, it cooled down, which allowed elementary particles like protons, neutrons, and electrons to form. Then gravity started pulling these particles together, forming massive clouds of hydrogen and helium, the simplest elements. Over millions of years, these clouds collapsed under their own weight, and boom, the first stars were born.
So stars are basically giant balls of burning hydrogen.
That's a great way to put it. The intense heat and pressure inside a star fuse hydrogen atoms together to form helium, releasing enormous amounts of energy. That's what makes them shine. And here's where it gets really interesting. As stars get older and run out of hydrogen fuel, they can explode in these spectacular supernovas, scattering heavier elements like carbon and oxygen into space.
Oh, so these stellar explosions are like giant cosmic recycling centers, creating the building blocks for new stars and planets.
Exactly. And it's from these recycled elements that our solar system, including our own Earth, formed about 4.5 billion years ago.
So we went from a big bang to swirling clouds of stardust to the birth of our solar system. It's incredible how everything is connected. But let's fast forward to Earth. I'm picturing a molten, fiery world, nothing like the planet we know today.
You're spot on. Early Earth was an incredibly harsh and volatile place. Just imagine constant volcanic eruptions, a molten surface, and no real atmosphere. Not exactly hospitable for life.
I can only imagine. So how did this fiery, chaotic world transform into the life-sustaining planet we know and love today? What happened to set the stage for life?
It took hundreds of millions of years for Earth to cool down enough for the first oceans to form. Volcanoes played a crucial role, spewing out gases that eventually created an early atmosphere. And while this atmosphere was very different from what we breathe today, it did contain some key ingredients like water vapor, methane, and ammonia.
Okay, so we have oceans forming and an atmosphere taking shape.
Mhm.
But how did we go from these basic ingredients to actual living, breathing organisms? That seems like a giant leap.
It's a question that has puzzled scientists for centuries. The most widely accepted theory is called chemical evolution. It's the idea that life arose from non-living matter through a series of chemical reactions.
Chemical evolution. So we're talking about life emerging from a primordial soup of chemicals.
Pretty much. Picture this. The early Earth, with these shallow pools of water, rich in organic molecules, exposed to volcanic heat and intense UV radiation from the sun. It was like a giant laboratory where complex chemical reactions could take place.
Okay, I'm picturing a bubbling cauldron of chemicals, but how did those chemicals organize themselves into something that could actually replicate and grow?
That's where it gets really fascinating. Scientists think that simple organic molecules, like amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, could have formed spontaneously in these early Earth conditions.
So the ingredients for life were basically just lying around, waiting to be put together. Were there any experiments to support this idea?
Actually, yes. The famous Miller-Urey experiment in the 1950s provided some evidence. These scientists basically recreated early Earth's conditions in a lab, a mixture of gases, some electrical sparks to simulate lightning, and guess what? They found amino acids forming in their primordial soup.
That's amazing. They basically created the building blocks of life in a lab.
Exactly. While it doesn't fully explain how life arose, it does show that those basic building blocks could have formed spontaneously under those conditions.
That's still a huge step. So we've got these amino acids forming. But there's a big question. How did these molecules come together to create the first self-replicating living cells? That's where the real mystery is, right?
Absolutely. It's one of the biggest questions in science, and we're still trying to figure out all the details. But here's what we do know. Around 3.5 billion years ago, the first single-celled organisms appeared on Earth.
Wow, so life has been around for a really, really long time. What were those first life forms like?
They were simple prokaryotic cells similar to bacteria. No nucleus, no complex organelles, just a membrane containing their genetic material. But they were alive. They could replicate, they could metabolize, they could evolve. And that's where our story really gets going.
Okay, so we have life, but Earth was still pretty much a microbial world at this point, right?
Exactly. For billions of years, these single-celled organisms were the only game in town. They ruled the oceans, diversified, and even evolved the ability to photosynthesize, releasing oxygen into the atmosphere.
Wait, so the oxygen we breathe today is thanks to those ancient microbes.
That's right. The rise of photosynthesis was a game changer. It completely transformed Earth's atmosphere, paving the way for the evolution of more complex life forms.
This is incredible. We've gone from the Big Bang to the first single-celled organisms changing the planet. I can't wait to see what happens next in this evolutionary saga.
Well, get ready for an explosion of diversity because the next chapter in our story is all about the incredible power of evolution.
Okay, so we've set the stage. Earth has an atmosphere, oceans teeming with microbial life, and oxygen levels are rising. What happened next? How do we go from those single-celled organisms to the incredible diversity of life we see today?
That's where evolution takes center stage. And a key player in this grand story is Charles Darwin and his groundbreaking theory of evolution by natural selection.
Darwin. The name is synonymous with evolution. But can you remind us what his theory is all about? What are the key ideas behind natural selection?
It's actually pretty simple and elegant. First, you have variation within populations, meaning no two individuals are exactly alike even if they look similar.
Okay, so like even in a litter of puppies, you'll see those subtle differences in size, color, personality.
Exactly. And some of those variations are heritable, meaning they can be passed down from parents to offspring through genes.
So those traits are encoded in their DNA like a blueprint for building an organism.
That's a great analogy. Now, this is where natural selection comes in. In any given environment, some traits might give individuals a slight advantage in survival or reproduction. Maybe they're a bit faster, better camouflaged, or more efficient at finding food.
So it's like a competition where those with the best traits for their environment are more likely to win?
Precisely. Those individuals with advantageous traits are more likely to survive, find mates, and pass those traits on to their kids. Over many generations, those beneficial traits become more common in the population, while less advantageous traits might fade away.
So the environment is essentially selecting the traits that are most successful.
You got it. It's like nature's running this giant experiment, constantly testing different variations and favoring those that work best in a particular environment. And over vast stretches of time, this process can lead to the evolution of new species.
It's amazing how such a simple mechanism can lead to such incredible diversity. But how do we know this whole evolution thing actually happened? What's the evidence?
That's where it gets really exciting. We have mountains of evidence from multiple fields of science that all point to evolution. One of the most compelling lines of evidence comes from fossils, the preserved remains of ancient organisms.
Fossils. I've always been fascinated by them. They're like snapshots of life from millions of years ago. What can they tell us about evolution?
Well, fossils provide a record of how life on Earth has changed over time. By dating these fossils, we can arrange them in chronological order and literally see the evolution of different lineages.
So it's like putting together a giant puzzle, piecing together the history of life from these fossil fragments.
That's a great way to think about it. And the fossil record is full of these amazing examples of transitional forms, organisms that show features intermediate between ancestral and descendant species.
Can you give us an example of one of those transitional forms?
Sure. One of the most famous is Archaeopteryx, a creature that lived around 150 million years ago. It had feathers and wings like a bird, but also teeth, claws, and a bony tail like a reptile. It's a beautiful example of a transitional form between dinosaurs and birds.
So Archaeopteryx is like a missing link between reptiles and birds, showing how one group evolved from the other.
Exactly. And we see these kinds of transitional forms throughout the fossil record, connecting different groups of organisms and showing how they've evolved over time.
That's pretty convincing. But fossils aren't the only evidence for evolution, right?
Right. We also have embryology, the study of how organisms develop from a single fertilized egg. By comparing the embryos of different species, we can see striking similarities in their early developmental stages, even if those similarities disappear as they mature.
So it's like looking for clues about evolutionary relationships in the way embryos develop.
Precisely. For example, the embryos of all vertebrates, including fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, develop gill slits at some point, even though those slits only become functional gills in fish.
That's fascinating. It suggests that all vertebrates share a common ancestor that had gills, even though many lineages have lost that trait over time.
Exactly. And these shared developmental patterns provide further evidence of common ancestry and evolutionary relationships.
Okay, so we have fossils showing the progression of life over time, and embryology revealing those shared developmental patterns. What other clues support the theory of evolution?
Another powerful line of evidence comes from comparative anatomy, where we compare the structures of different organisms. A classic example is the forelimbs of mammals. If you look at the bones of a human arm, a bat wing, a whale flipper, and a cat's leg, you'll see they all have the same basic bone structure, even though they're used for very different functions.
So it's like the same blueprint modified for different purposes.
That's a great way to put it. These similar structures, called homologous structures, are strong evidence of shared ancestry. They suggest that these different mammals all descended from a common ancestor that had that basic forelimb structure.
That makes sense. So similar structures point to shared ancestry. But what about cases where organisms have similar features but aren't closely related?
Those cases are interesting too. We call those analogous structures. They occur when unrelated organisms evolve similar features because they face similar environmental pressures.
Okay, give us an example of that.
Think about the wings of a bird and the wings of an insect. Both are used for flight, but they evolved independently and have completely different structures. Birds have feathers and bones in their wings, while insects have thin membranes supported by veins.
So it's like they found different solutions to the same problem, converging on a similar feature through different evolutionary paths.
Exactly. Analogous structures demonstrate the power of natural selection to shape organisms in predictable ways, even across vast evolutionary distances.
This is all so fascinating. We've got fossils, embryology, and comparative anatomy all pointing toward this grand narrative of evolution. But I'm curious, what about more recent discoveries? Has anything in modern science challenged or changed our understanding of evolution?
Well, one of the most exciting developments has been the rise of molecular biology and genetics. By comparing the DNA and protein sequences of different organisms, we can now trace their evolutionary relationships with remarkable precision. The more similar the genetic code, the more closely related the organisms are likely to be.
So it's like looking for family resemblances at the molecular level.
Precisely. And this molecular evidence has not only confirmed many of the relationships we've inferred from fossils and anatomy, but it's also helped us refine our understanding of the tree of life.
It's amazing how all these different fields of science converge to tell this incredible story of evolution. But with so much diversity on Earth, how do we even begin to make sense of it all? How did life evolve into so many different forms?
That's where the concept of adaptive radiation comes in. It's the process by which organisms diversify rapidly from an ancestral species into a multitude of new forms, particularly when a change in the environment makes new resources available, creates new challenges, or opens new environmental niches.
Ooh, adaptive radiation. Didn't Darwin observe this with the finches in the Galapagos Islands?
You're exactly right. Darwin noticed that different species of finches on the Galapagos Islands had evolved different beak shapes, specialized for different food sources. Some had beaks for cracking seeds, others for catching insects, and so on. They all descended from a common ancestor that arrived on the islands, and over time, they radiated outward, adapting to those unique opportunities presented by each island's environment.
So it's like evolution went into overdrive, creating a whole bunch of variations on a theme to fill those different ecological roles.
Precisely. And we see this pattern repeated throughout evolutionary history. For example, the marsupials of Australia are another classic case of adaptive radiation.
The marsupials, those are the mammals with pouches, right? Like kangaroos and koalas.
Exactly. Isolated on the continent of Australia, marsupials evolved a wide range of forms to fill those different ecological niches. We see marsupial moles, marsupial wolves, even marsupial cats. They resemble their placental mammal counterparts in other parts of the world, but they evolved these similarities independently.
Wait a minute, I'm a little confused. If they're not closely related, how do they end up looking so similar?
That's a great question. It's an example of convergent evolution, where distantly related organisms evolve similar features because they face similar environmental pressures.
This is not because of shared ancestry, but because they're facing similar challenges in their environments.
You nailed it. Convergent evolution shows us that natural selection can lead to these predictable outcomes, even across vast evolutionary distances.
Wow, it's amazing how evolution has woven this tapestry of life, connecting everything from bacteria to whales to us humans. Speaking of humans, how does our own story fit into this grand evolutionary narrative?
Well, that's where we'll pick up next time. Join us as we trace the fascinating journey of human evolution, from our primate ancestors to the emergence of modern Homo sapiens.
Last time, we left off with the evolution of amniotic eggs, a true game changer that allowed vertebrates to really conquer the land. I'm excited to explore what happened next. Did dinosaurs just, suddenly appear on the scene?
Not quite suddenly, but the age of reptiles was definitely about to begin. From those early amniotes, this fascinating group called the diapsids emerged. They had these two openings in their skulls behind their eyes, and that allowed for stronger jaw muscles.
Okay, so 2 holes in the skull seems like a pretty small detail. Why was that so important?
Well, it's all about adaptation and efficiency, right? Those skull openings gave diapsids a really powerful bite, and that allowed them to diversify their diets and become even more successful predators.
So it was a key innovation that helped them rule the land.
Exactly. And within that diapsid lineage, 2 main groups emerged. The lepidosaurs, which include lizards and snakes, and the archosaurs, which include crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs. Now we're talking. They were the dominant land animals for, millions of years?
You got it. The reign of the dinosaurs lasted for over 180 million years, and during that time, they evolved this incredible array of forms, from the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex to the long-necked sauropods.
It's just mind-blowing to imagine these creatures roaming the earth. What were some of the key adaptations that made dinosaurs so successful?
Well, their upright posture was a big one. It allowed for a much more efficient movement and greater agility compared to earlier reptiles that kind of sprawled on the ground.
So they were built for speed and power.
Exactly. They also had this high metabolic rate, which meant they could maintain a more active lifestyle. And some dinosaurs, like birds, even evolved feathers for insulation and eventually flight.
Feathers on dinosaurs. I thought feathers were unique to birds.
Yeah, that's what scientists thought for a long time. But in recent decades, paleontologists have uncovered all these feathered dinosaurs, which reveals that feathers actually evolved much earlier than birds.
That's incredible. So are birds basically just modern-day dinosaurs?
You could definitely say that. They're the direct descendants of theropod dinosaurs, a group that includes iconic predators like Velociraptor.
Wow, it's amazing to think that a lineage that gave rise to, fearsome predators like T-Rex also led to the delicate and diverse birds we see today. But what about the end of the dinosaurs? I know they went extinct, but what happened?
It's a question that has captivated scientists for generations. The prevailing theory is that this massive asteroid impact, about 66 million years ago, wiped out the dinosaurs, along with something like 75% of all plant and animal species on Earth.
An asteroid impact. That sounds catastrophic. What kind of devastation would an impact like that cause?
Well, imagine an asteroid several miles wide, slamming into the Earth at incredible speed. The impact would trigger these massive earthquakes, tsunamis, and wildfires. Dust and debris would have been thrown into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun and causing this global cooling effect.
It sounds like a truly apocalyptic event. How did any life survive something like that?
It was definitely a rough time for life on Earth. But some species did manage to survive, including small mammals, birds, insects, and some reptiles. These survivors were able to adapt to those changing conditions and eventually thrive in this post-dinosaur world.
So it was this mass extinction, but also an opportunity for new forms of life to evolve.
Exactly. The extinction of the dinosaurs opened up all these ecological niches that were previously occupied by these giant reptiles, and this allowed mammals to diversify and evolve into this wide variety of forms, including primates, our own lineage.
Okay, so the stage is set for the rise of mammals, but we're still millions of years away from humans, right? What happened during this time?
Well, after the dinosaurs went extinct, mammals went through this period of rapid diversification, evolving into a whole range of forms to fill those newly available ecological niches. We start to see the emergence of early whales, bats, rodents, and of course, primates.
Primates, that's our branch of the family tree, right?
Yeah.
What were those early primates like?
Picture these small, tree-dwelling creatures with grasping hands and feet and forward-facing eyes that gave them depth perception. They were well suited to life in the forests, and they had many of the traits that would eventually lead to us humans.
So they had the basic building blocks of what makes us human.
Exactly. And over millions of years, primates kept evolving, adapting to different environments and developing new traits. Then, around 6 to 7 million years ago, our own lineage, the hominins, branched off from the other apes.
Hominins. Now we're really getting into the heart of human evolution. We've covered so much ground today, it's incredible to think about the vastness of time and the interconnectedness of life on Earth. From the first single-celled organisms to the mighty dinosaurs to the rise of mammals and our own primate ancestors, it's a story that continues to unfold. Who knows what amazing chapters are still to be written in the epic tale of life? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the history of life. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and stay curious.